Hello and welcome to FinextraTV's 2021 prediction series. I'm Hannah Wallace, and calling into our virtual studio now is Esther Chibesa, Treasury and Trade Solutions Head of Sub-Saharan Africa for Citi. So welcome, Esther. Thank you very much for calling in.
Thank you, Hannah. It's a pleasure to meet you.
It's a pleasure to have you on. So we're talking today about empowering the unbanked in Sub-Saharan Africa and also banks' priorities for 2021. I want to start by setting the scene and sort of painting the payments landscape in Sub-Saharan Africa and that region, and highlighting some of the hurdles that are still maybe left to jump with regards to financial inclusion. So let's start there. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Thank you, Hannah. So we've seen a really rapid growth in demand for financial services and for financial inclusion in general across the continent, particularly off of the back of the COVID-19 crisis that we've all been living through this last year. Part of the accelerant for that growth has been the radical action by many of our regulators to lower the cost of financial services across the board by lowering, prices, mandating free services, mandating free payments in some cases, as well as the injection of liquidity at low prices across the continent. So these things have helped to drive forward the demand for financial services. But financial inclusion continues to be an important imperative. The hurdles that exist are several. We continue to see vulnerable populations across the continent, in particular women who often have difficulty accessing financial services directly, who are often, dependent on a partner, a spouse, or some other person in order to actually have direct access to financial services. Rural populations continue to be vulnerable, and there's lots of work to be done, particularly in providing the broadband and the infrastructure that is needed to reach some of these places.
All right, that's interesting. So looking at Citi then, what are your top priorities for the year ahead in terms of using mobile money technology to help?
Great. So we've set out a very clear plan, and we are investing quite heavily over the course of the next 12 to 24 months in Sub-Saharan Africa to scale the proposition that we have available to our clients. And we are using really a three-pronged approach. The first is really to pay attention to and to participate in all of the financial markets infrastructures across the continent that are proliferating, that support interoperable payments, and these schemes will include wallets or other alternative payment instruments, which we really believe are truly the bedrock for driving financial inclusion in this continent. Africa has a huge population. Easily half that population has access to a mobile telephone, and then again about 150, 200 million wallets across the continent, and that number is growing. So that's one thing we're doing. The other is really to work with fintech firms, with aggregators of note, in order to scale our propositions. And we particularly believe in this particular strategy because it enables us to work with entities that have excelled in building capability, who understand the continent well, and who have good relationships with regulators across the continent to enable us to scale. And I'd say the third angle there is really to provide thought leadership, to be at the table when conversations around how payment systems should develop over the course of the next 5 to 10 years as our regulators are thinking through what innovation looks like, to provide our thinking and some of the best practices that we see across the world that can drive this initiative forward.
All right, so taking all of that into account then, what about taxation on digital services? How do you think this might change in 2021?
Interesting question. So we've observed that, tax authorities across the continent are paying attention to the pivoting of parts of our economy into the e-commerce area. And as more people get comfortable with buying goods and services online, so do we see a heightened interest in understanding what is going on from an e-commerce perspective, understanding the scale of that economy. And certainly we've seen, regulators, certainly in Kenya and other parts of Africa, put forth digital services taxation regulations. And we're of the view that we will begin to see more and more of that. I think the debate around digital taxation is developing. Certainly, there are merits for providing services that are easily accessible to many at a price point that makes sense, particularly for the sector that we're talking about. And at the same time, I think it's important to also realize that there are real challenges in terms of raising funding for purposes of various fiscal agendas across the continent.
Mm-hmm. All right, that's interesting. So finally then, what's Citi's approach? I'd like to delve into that in enabling mobile payment and collections in this region for the year ahead.
As I said, we're going to make important investments in terms of expanding our proposition across the continent, and we have, several of those in the works. And as the year progresses, we will be supporting more of our customers in several parts of Africa to actually access payments as well as collections using these particular channels. That's one. We're working very closely with central banks and regulators to go live on various financial markets infrastructures and to provide access using that particular route. And I would also say we're doing quite a lot of work in order to upgrade and enhance our own internal platforms, our own channels, to make sure that the user experience that we're going to bring forth for our customers really truly will be world class.
So watch this space, I think it's safe to say. But Esther, we'll leave it there for now. Thank you so much for calling in and sharing your insights. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Hannah. It's really been a pleasure to speak with you. And yes, watch this space.